Picture this: White Star Line, desperate for a quick payday, swaps a damaged ship with a brand new one, sends it off to its doom, and cashes in on the insurance. Sounds like a plot twist straight out of a Hollywood heist movie, right? Well, hold on to your life jackets because we're about to dive into this iceberg of a theory. Is it a shocking truth or just another unsinkable myth? Let's navigate through the wreckage and find out. The birth of the theory. The theory took flight in 1995 when Robin Gardner, a Titanic-obsessed amateur historian with a flair for the dramatic, co-authored Riddle of the Titanic. In his book, Gardner proposed a shocking idea. What if the Titanic and Olympic weren't just sisters but actually switched places in an audacious insurance scam? According to him, the Olympic's fateful collision with the HMS Hawk in 1911 left it so banged up that it wasn't worth the repair costs. But instead of scrapping the ship, Gardner suggested that White Star Line pulled off the ultimate swaparoo. Picture this: Titanic, still under construction, would be finished off in Olympic's clothes, while the battle-scored Olympic was primed for a watery grave. It sounds like the perfect con. White Star Line gets a brand new unsinkable ship and a massive insurance payout from sinking their own. At first glance, this theory seems to make perfect sense, right? But before we get carried away with conspiracy fantasies, let's reel it back and take a hard look at the facts. The collision that sparked the theory. In September 1911, the RMS Olympic, still fresh out of the shipyard and gleaming with new luxury, found itself in an unexpected dance with the Royal Navy's HMS Hawk. The two ships collided in the Solent, a narrow and tricky waterway between the Isle of Wight and the English coast, like two giants trying to share a lane in a game of bumper cars. The official reports, as they do in any good conspiracy, laid the blame squarely on the Olympic's shoulders for the mishap. However, the damage, while notable, was far from the death knell some conspiracy theorists claim. Still, this incident planted the seeds for the idea that maybe, just maybe, Olympic was beyond repair, and White Star Line had a trick up their sleeve for the fate of both ships. Would they go for the dramatic switch, or was this just another unfortunate collision in the high-stakes world of luxury liners? Stay tuned because the plot thickens. Gardner's theory, an insurance scam. Gardner's theory centers around the idea that the Olympic, heavily damaged by the collision, would have cost more to repair than it would to simply collect on its insurance. At the same time, Titanic, nearly finished, could easily be passed off as the Olympic. With both ships looking nearly identical, it would be possible to switch them without anyone noticing. Gardner's theory suggests that White Star Line, desperate to recoup its losses, planned the sinking of the Olympic under the guise of the Titanic. The idea was that Titanic would be sent out on a second maiden voyage, only to sink at a predetermined point in the Atlantic, allowing White Star to claim the insurance money. But what about the evidence? Was Olympic really beyond repair, as Gardner claims? The answer, it seems, is no. The damage to the Olympic. According to Gardner, the Olympic was severely damaged in the collision, requiring the replacement of nearly a third of its hull plating. However, this claim doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Official reports and photographs from the time show that the damage was far less severe. The collision resulted in a gash in the hull and damage to the starboard propeller shaft, but this was hardly enough to render the ship unrepairable. Naval architect Harry Roscoe, who assisted in the inspection of the damage, testified that the damage was contained to a specific area of the ship and that the ship's overall structural integrity remained intact. The damage was significant, but certainly not beyond repair. In fact, similar ships with much worse damage had been repaired and returned to service. The cost of repair versus insurance fraud. Even if the Olympic was severely damaged, the theory that it would be cheaper for White Star Line to stage an insurance fraud is questionable. Harlan and Wolff, known for their expertise in ship repairs, had a proven track record of handling severe damage and getting ships back into service. The idea that White Star Line would resort to such an extreme measure when they had the means to repair the ship simply doesn't add up. Moreover, financial records from the time show that White Star Line was not on the brink of bankruptcy. In fact, their profit and loss account for 1911 showed a surplus, making the need for an insurance payout unnecessary. The company was doing fine financially, and there's little evidence to suggest that they would have resorted to an elaborate fraud scheme. The problem with the switch. Even if White Star Line had wanted to swap the ships, the logistics of such a plan would have been incredibly difficult. The two ships, although similar in many ways, had subtle differences. For example, the design of the B deck was different on each ship, with the Olympic having a full-length promenade and the Titanic featuring more enclosed cabins. The Titanic's hull was also slightly larger, as it had been altered during construction. To make the switch, workers would have had to perform significant modifications to both ships in a very short amount of time, something that would have been nearly impossible to accomplish without anyone noticing. The shipyard in Belfast employed over 15,000 workers at the time, and it's hard to believe that not a single person would have spilled the beans about such a massive conspiracy. The idea that these workers could have been silenced by threats or bribery seems highly implausible, especially given the scale of the operation. Additionally, the publicity surrounding the Titanic's maiden voyage was enormous, and any change in ship identity would have been nearly impossible to hide. Even with all the resources of White Star Line at its disposal, the sheer number of people involved in the construction and launch would make it highly unlikely that a covert switch could have been orchestrated without raising suspicion. It's far more likely that the tragedy occurred due to the conditions surrounding the ship's ill-fated voyage, not a grand conspiracy. The sinking of Titanic, an accident, not a fraud. The sinking of the Titanic is a tragedy that continues to capture our imaginations. But despite the sensational theories, it was not the result of an insurance scam gone wrong. The widely accepted story is far simpler and far more devastating. Titanic collided with an iceberg in the dead of night, causing a catastrophic breach in the hull that flooded several of her watertight compartments. The ship, as grand and unsinkable as she was, couldn't handle the relentless flooding. As the ship's hull crumpled under the pressure, over 1,500 lives were lost in the icy waters of the Atlantic. Eyewitness accounts from passengers and crew who lived through that horrifying night paint a clear picture. Titanic was struck by an iceberg, not a mysterious second ship involved in a conspiracy. And despite what some theorists claim, there is no credible evidence to suggest that the ship was intentionally sunk for insurance money. The survivors of that fateful night tell a chilling and tragic tale of human loss, not corporate greed. The Titanic was a product of its time, designed with the best technology available, but no amount of engineering could account for the combination of a cold night, a massive iceberg, and inadequate safety measures. Let's face it, sometimes the simplest explanation is the hardest to accept, but the Titanic's fate was sealed not by fraud, but by a deadly accident that no one could have predicted. This event marked one of the greatest maritime disasters in history, not the result of intentional malfeasance, but of a perfect storm of unfortunate circumstances. If you enjoyed unraveling this Titanic-sized mystery with us, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most bizarre theories.